Uh, and still today, the majority of marriages are arranged marriages, which used to be a more common thing in the rest of the world. Uh, the the Bollywood movies, they're usually love stories, and they're hopeful about finding love and but in reality, that's not what happens as much. I have a friend of mine who uh, she immigrated to the U.S. about 10 years ago, and her marriage was an arranged marriage, and she's trying to get out of it because of the technicality of he was vague about his caste. She's from the warrior caste, which is ranked second, uh, and he was from a merchant caste, which has all these different levels to it. That sort of thing too is the specificness of the different types of work, and then that is what you and your children and your children's children do. Um, if we're talking about if places developing become meritocracies where they work hard and they succeed, um, if you're from the sweeper caste, it is your job to sweep up, and you get some small amount of money, barely enough to live. Sweeping extra good isn't going to really get you anything, you know. Uh, and so, but that's another reason why when we talk about migrations of populations, moving to cities looking for different types of work, a lot of it is that, and a lot of it is people who want to break free of these chains of what employment they're allowed to do in the different places that they're from. Ah. Uh, Jumping into, as I said, the topic is religion. Religion obviously being a real big component of many people's lives throughout the world. So you can see it structures people's lives in a very real way, kind of depending on the roll of the dice of where you were born, right? Let's see. Don't need to read summaries. Most of this you probably knew. You probably knew that most religions incorporate elements of the supernatural. Very often there's natural elements that are combined, especially in animist religions. There used to be a lot more. That used to be kind of like before organized religion. Animist religions are like, for example, if a river has certain religious significance to you, and maybe it's because has provided well for you, and maybe the fish have also a type of a spirit, and maybe a tree, and maybe a type of tree, or maybe one specific tree, but lots of things in the landscapes, people would attribute different kind of supernatural qualities to them, right? And these were the older religions, and these religions still exist in some places, kind of depending on how much contact with very often big empires, because big empires are a way that many religions spread. If the center of that empire adopts a specific religion, and then it requires everyone that they take over to also be part of that religion, people usually do rather than be killed, So let's see, we have all kinds of different religions. Well, obviously you have religions that either are looking for new membership or religions that are not looking for new membership. Typically, ethnic religions, if I start a religion and the religion is everybody on this side of the room is the chosen people, right? Right here and now, and it's decided, well, y'all weren't on this side of the room, so no matter what you do, you can't really convert to being on this side of the room, right? That's kind of what an ethnic religion is. It's very specific to very specific people, very specific place, usually a very specific time. And so that you have a chosen people, and then you don't. Monotheistic religions, polytheistic religions, we'll go into talk about a lot of these different more specifics as we go. Um, Most religions are actually blends of different religions because usually there was some type of religion beforehand. Very often, the um, classic examples would be, um, well, in Latin America, for example, a lot of the old religions before Christianity was brought in, a lot of the religious beliefs were maternal, right? With women having imbued with this special kind of spiritual power. When Christianity came in, there was kind of more of an embrace of the Virgin Mary over, say, Jesus. Not that Jesus was also a strong part of Christianity in Latin America, but that connection with a maternal figure led to an emphasis on the woman part of the story, right? Well, let's see. People often will confuse Orthodox religions with fundamentalism and religious extremism. That's because they can at one period of time have one and then switch into the other. Just varying streams of intolerance, right? Various levels of intolerance. In geography, we're always looking at geographic regions and trying to figure out what makes regions tick, but it makes it difficult to do something like create an accurate map of world religions because there really is so much more overlap than these maps would show, right? Lots of, do they have? Oh, they do have. You can see some of the animist religions that are kind of in areas that are let's say off the beaten path a bit more. They're usually areas that have had less interaction with more modern cultures. So they have the older, but again, as I said, often these different local spiritual beliefs will be kind of mixed into the dominant ones that come in. Major religions of the world. The largest growing, from what I've been reading, is actually unaffiliated, is people opting out of the whole system. All right, Hindu religions. Well, let's see if there's anything on here that wasn't in the video. Polytheistic, I don't know if they specifically went into that too much in the video. Divided into castes. Of course, your castes, the belief is that how you acted in a past life, you're either rewarded or penalized with the caste you're born into. So there's a mindset, for example, when I went to India, well, the tour group I went with, it is normally a good tour group. It was an Australian company, but they had the guy who was leading our tour. He was of the Brahmin priest caste, and he was extremely bigoted. And so the whole trip, we got to hear these diatribes about how other people should not be able to vote, for example. He felt very strongly that the traditional measures of society, and because he was from the highest caste, that he should have more power and control and money and everything else. It seemed to me actually in that case the guy was just something of someone who didn't accomplish much in their life, and then they kind of wanted to blame how society was changing. And it's like, well, you were born in the highest caste, so you probably could have accomplished whatever you really wanted to do if you were capable. But yeah, and as the video said, casteism, or not hiring people or discriminating because of castes, that was outlawed many years ago. When Gandhi took power, he tried to change a lot of these laws, but it's could be compared to racism in that you can have laws against it, but then there are still people who just kind of do it, like in hiring and things like that, and they'll kind of be confounding about it, and it's a similar thing where you could have these things outlawed. India also tried a similar thing where they tried to, by law, have a certain percentage of jobs in government put out to what they called scheduled castes to try to increase the representation of the different lower castes into employment. The U.S. government did a similar thing actually when it first put out anti-racist hiring laws. The government then made efforts to specifically try to hire from different races that were not being hired popularly within the government. And so Truman, for example, attempted to, well, we have control over the military, so let's try to take out racism in the military, right? They try to specific things like that. All right. I'm going to take you to some different places in India that I have been. One interesting thing about India is its own history and the cultural landscape, as we call it, is just kind of everywhere. This is kind of a very famous World Heritage Site. One places that are declared World Heritage Sites is actually really good for their tourism and their tourist dollars. But this here, this is about 1,000-year-old set of temples, right? So everybody has been raised with these temples around, and this is some of the kind of early Hinduism, early Jainism temples. Very, very intricate, and there used to be quite a few more of these temples. They used to go over half of the country, but many of them were, and these are just tourist knickknacks that are made in the same style, but many were torn down through time when different empires came in. This is actually just a picture of the vehicle that I was in most. It's kind of like a motorcycle if you kind of try to put some seats on top of a motorcycle. As you can see, no seat belt or anything like that. Our documentary there also talked a lot about this emphasis on cleanliness, right? This emphasis on cleanliness, and it's one of those, there's all these contradictions. So for example, the Ganges, right, is considered sacred source of water, and the waters are considered spiritually pure, right? Spiritually pure. But along the Ganges, I mean, India is a developing place. Unfortunately, lots of the early phases of development involves a lot of pollution. And the river itself, rivers are usually ways places get rid of their pollution. And so the Ganges itself is very polluted. But as I said, well, people are going and doing these ritualistic washing and bathing. You'd be better served to go use well water, but well water isn't considered spiritually clean as the river water. Brahmin priest. I'm going to take you to an area, Varanasi. This is a huge area where if you've had a relative die and you want them to have a better next life, if you take them to Varanasi on the edges of the Ganges River and have a funeral fire, the odds are better. And so people tend to try to do this. You see some of the rituals going on. I'm going to take you went down the river a bit, just kind of see the sights. Since it was one of the most religious places kind of in the world, you'll randomly see these symbols here and there, And don't be confused. There's not like neo-Nazis in India. I mean, maybe there are, but the Nazis took these symbols from India. India has all these different types of symbols. It actually has a opposite version of it, and I don't remember exactly. I think it means the coming together of people or something like that. But the symbol was here first. It was taken by Europeans. So let's see, as we go down the river. Now this was the dry season. So the river is actually at its lowest point. At its highest point, it could go up to the tops of the stairs that you will see. So there's a big change because of the monsoon rains in the monsoon season. You can see some people cleaning, you see a number of tents. A lot of people will come here in a pilgrimage, even if they don't have a dead relative, but if they have a dead relatives that they want to bring their body and have a ceremony, then they really do need to come down here. If you were here, you would actually see much more fires than you're going to see in these pictures. My guide said that it's considered impolite to take photos of any of the fires, but there's usually smoke everywhere, and these are bodies being burned. And you know, as I showed you some older Hindu temples, there have been a lot that are along the river that have been slowly sinking into the river. And so when the water is at its low point as it was, some of these you could see little bits of, but sometimes they're just completely under the water. I would say, you know, in the United States, we compared to the rest of the world, our architecture has hardly any history. I would say if we found a temple that was kind of mostly in the Mississippi, we would probably pull it out, and it would probably be like the center of a giant exhibit, right? But in much of the world, there's so much ancient history just everywhere in the landscape that it's kind of like they kind of shrug, you know? I mentioned that the water's polluted. There's also just a lot of outright just garbage in the water, right? Because it's like that's what people do to get rid of their garbage. India is kind of known for having not the best garbage pickup. Just culturally, there's just something about, so there's lots of just garbage. And of course, you go to most cities of the world, you're going to see a lot of garbage. If you've traveled, you might have experienced these kinds of things. Well, let me say if you go to India, you're going to see more. You'll be like, I thought I saw a lot of garbage in places, but this is a lot of garbage in places. The other thing, well, you won't see in the photos is when people are bringing bodies, sometimes by the time they've gotten here, they've spent all their resources and they don't actually have money for the funeral fire. The wood is very expensive. There's been not only a history of deforestation, but high in demand for these fires, and just not a ton of wood. Wood doesn't grow super fast, you know? And so sometimes people just won't have the money, and so they'll just leave the bodies on the coast. So you'll see a fair amount of bodies on the coast. Also, if a baby dies, they don't need a fire because they're considered still to be relatively pure. So they'll drop them in the water and you will see them floating as you're going by on a boat. It's not at all unusual. You'll also see stray dogs fighting over human remains. Like I said, people often don't have the money for the fires. Yeah.
Did you know about that before you went there?
Not to the extent that I saw it.
Okay.
Not to the extent that I saw it. Like, for example, so in the video we watched, they had the Brahmin priest, right? And you guys noticed that he had like ash on his forehead when he was being interviewed? And he talked about it a little bit, and he said, well, this doesn't count as being dirty because it's pure. Well, a number of people of the priest caste, especially if they're kind of living out and camped out, some of them stay here for many, many months. They walk around naked, but they're covered head to toe in a thick coating of ash. and this ash is considered clean. It is from the bodies that are burned. They cover themselves with ash from these bodies. So culturally, someone from my life experience going here would think that that does not seem clean, right? But just like the water to me would not seem clean. But spiritually, these things are considered clean, and so it's just like it's difficult, like I said, to conceptualize reality versus religious reality, right? As you can imagine, so this was before the pandemic and everything, of course. But during the pandemic, there's been a lot more death, right? And so there's been even more problems of people trying to bring the bodies of relatives. The government has opened up a couple of crematoriums because it was just there's only so many bodies you could have kind of laying around, right? That's a health epidemic just waiting to happen on top of a health epidemic that we already have. So there's been a bit of a change of that. Again, as you can see, just cleaning off. You get a lot of pilgrims and a lot of pilgrimages, and people will just kind of set up little tents and whatnot. This is actually, when I was there, this was the only of the government crematoriums that there were. They still required some type of small fee. I don't remember what it was, but it was more affordable than buying wood. As I said, it was not a lot of cheap wood to be had. They're actually filming a Bollywood movie here. I don't know if you could tell. And this is just at the front of our boat during this whole little time that we were going. You also saw in the video that there's a lot of fire involved in a lot of the different ceremonies. And they kind of just have these going all day in this area of the world. So as I said, there's been different empires through time that have brought different religions into this area. And so the main kind of two, let's say, competing religions in the region have been Hinduism and Islam. Of these countries here, Bangladesh and Pakistan, mostly Islamic, and then India itself is mostly Hindu today. I would say, well, when we talk about borders and stuff, I talked about the differences of East and West Pakistan, right, and all that stuff. Yeah, well, okay, I don't need to repeat that. Well, and so within India, of course, you have a lot of Hindu architecture and whatnot, and you have a lot of Islamic architecture. The book uses the picture of the Taj Mahal in this chapter, and this is actually the building that is facing the Taj Mahal, and people never really turn around and take a picture of that building. But the architecture of that building is much more of your classic Islamic, with not only the specific script that you'll often see in architecture, Islamic architecture, but the kind of mosaic tile patterns that are repeating. And then so you're going through that, and that's your view. Taj Mahal, when it comes to Islamic architecture, again, a lot of the same things that we saw on the other side, right? A lot of the script and the stelae tiles, and also, as most of the religious temples, they'll have these four structures or pillars that are surrounding. These ones here are actually built at a slight out angle because it was worried if there was an earthquake or something, they would smash the kind of jewel of the entire place. And this is, again, just another picture back. This was the dry season, and so the local river that is usually bigger than the Mississippi goes down to just a trickle during the dry season. These are some pilgrims. This was just a little temple that I came by. There's lots of little temples just kind of all over in India. As I said, very religious place, and actually lots of different religions. This is specifically a fertility. You bring flowers and you hope that this will increase your odds of fertility in your family. I'm going to show you a middle-class home in an area that's more of a suburb. You know, a lot of the stuff that you'll see of India are kind of like shanty towns, or they'll be Bollywood, big shiny buildings. I'm going to show you a bit of a middle ground. There are cows, you know, walking around, as I'm sure you thought when you've read about India or heard about India. So this is a little area. As I said, it's a suburb outside of New Delhi. And the construction is self-built housing. As you can see, a lot of brick and concrete, not a lot of wood, because as I said, there's been a huge amount of deforestation, especially during the colonial rule of the British. The British wanted that wood, and they got a lot of it. Did I ever tell you guys the history of the tree hugger movement in this area? If you've heard that term, tree hugger, it originated actually in India because of the monsoon rains, right? These huge rains that happen every year. If an area is deforested, very often adjoining property that is a farm, that could all just be washed away in these great big rains. I should have brought some there. I went to some areas that are preserves, and then there are some areas that had been forested, but now they're just a bunch of rocks and areas that used to be farmland. But again, the rains just washed away, and you just have these rocks that are left. Well, many years ago, there was an early environmental movement in India. I forget the name. But when loggers would come to chop down trees, they didn't have any resources or anything, so they just literally, they would hug the tree. They would try to hold onto the tree in the hopes that would make it so that it wouldn't be chopped down. And sometimes they would just pull the people away, and sometimes it wouldn't be worth the bother. So they did save some amount of trees, and again, this was mostly not just to save the trees in among themselves, which had a number of different kind of spiritual connections for a lot of people, as I mentioned, that animist religions that are here and there. But they didn't want, once those trees are chopped down, the roots will rot relatively quickly, and then you could have all kinds of topsoil get washed away. Well, all right, back to showing you a middle-class house. I actually went for cooking lessons. There was a little area for prayer inside the house that they had made, and I was told that this is pretty common in the houses in India. As I mentioned, concrete construction, and I did ask them if I could show pictures to my class of what their rooms were like. They're still hooking up the electricity there. As I said, we went here for a cooking class. I don't know if y'all like Indian food. I consider it the best food in the world as far as I'm concerned. But the Indian food I had in India was surprisingly not good. I was shocked because it's my favorite type of food. But it's all about cost of ingredients and things like that. When I went to neighboring China, I would often have better Indian food than when I was in India. It depends. You could pay quite a bit extra for kind of like a fancy meal in India, and then it would be more kind of what you would have at an Indian restaurant here in Minnesota. So we're quite lucky as far as that goes. This here is Ganesh, all right, above a door. And there's little religious symbols just kind of like all over the place. People have them necklaces, they have them on walls, above doors, just like a real rich part of people's lives. This is a kitchen, which is, like I said, a bit more of a middle class kitchen. They're cooking with gas here, which a lot of people are moving toward cooking with gas. It's a slightly more plentiful resource than, say, when I was in China, people were actually cooking mostly with coal, which I was kind of surprised by. I mean, it makes sense, and plenty of other places have used coal to cook, but in China they sell these round brick things that have all these holes kind of poked in them, and you put that in your oven and it'll heat up the house and you cook your food on it too. Gas, like I said, there's a fair amount of coal in India, don't get me wrong, but do people know what the main source of cooking fuel is in India? It's dried out manure. And there's a caste who make these like cow pie mixture of manure and straw and stuff, and they're these round things that are just kind of everywhere. And you don't think that they're just manure because they're dried out, so they don't really stink. But as you can imagine, very cheap source of fuel, very, I guess, environmental if you think about it. But a lot of people are moving away from it. But it's still the majority of how things are heated, how things are cooked. The reason I had the red mark on my head there was I get headaches sometimes, and I had a headache. And my guide, he said that the markings on the heads change in color depending on the effect of the crushed up stuff, and that it's actually supposed to have an effect. And he had some that was for headaches, and it was the red color, and you put it like that, and that's supposed to help your headache. And it did seem to help my headache to some extent. All right, changing topics here a little bit. Islamic cultural regions. Well, let's see. I'm not sure if I want to dive into this unless I have time to cover all of the religions that are kind of in this subsection. So I think I'm gonna call it early for today, and we'll jump into this section for next time. All right, thanks for coming.